So the residential segregation was not only personal and local prejudice, but it was really the result of systematic public policy at the time. So they had huge obstacles against them. The FHA, extra set up to provide home ownership. They saw it as a bulwark against communism at the time. They thought if people would own homes, they would be less likely to turn to share their wealth in any way. Between 1934 and 1962, 98% of the home loans through the FHA were to whites. So it was they were fully aware as they talked that they were really having to face almost impossible obstacles. But they were lucky in the help they got. They hired a local attorney, J. Chester Allen, who was an African American who had dedicated his life to providing, to fighting for social justice and racial justice. From the moment he came, he devoted himself to opening the so-called public indoor swimming pool. I'm sure that all you guys are familiar with. To African Americans, and it took a full 19 years to succeed for him. He also was fighting for having the defense homes for African Americans not always put into the worst parts, but he gave up, and I think it is a very moving statement because it really encapsulates what he was always fighting for. He was always saying African Americans are loyal and patriotic citizens, but that doesn't mean that they are not also devoted to fight for justice. And he was always walking this line. And when he saw that he wasn't getting anywhere with getting the defense homes in a place where he would have liked them, he said the following: "We feel we are making a sacrifice in agreeing to segregation, but we are willing to take it at the present if it will help the war effort. And it is vitally important that the Negro citizen continue his unbroken record of loyalty to America, and at the same time militantly insist that he be given his full rights of American citizenship." I think that is very moving, that here they want to be loyal citizens, and yet they are not recognized as citizens at all. But he took on the cause of better homes. Sorry, man. And on a Sunday in May 1950, a group of 26 families got together, and they accomplished three important things. The first is they decided to found a building corporation, the very first in Indiana, and they called themselves Better Homes of South Bend. And the minutes begin with this statement, the very first sentence: "A non-profit organization was formed and given the name of Better Homes of South Bend." It always seems to me that this kind of simple statement in the passive voice hides so much of the courage it took to do that, of the hope they had for achieving this, and also of the fear of putting themselves out there as the very first. The second thing Chester Allen helped them do was organize internally. They had a president, a very able president, Louisa Allen, who also had worked at Studebaker, and a whole slate of officers and a board of directors, and they had regular meetings. They made sure every voice was heard and everything was voted on democratically and then followed through. And the third thing is what Professor Anderson already alluded to, the secrecy. It was stressed again and again in the minutes: don't let word get out what we are doing, because if it does, before we are ready, the powers that be will certainly destroy it. So they didn't even in the minutes say where they wanted to live. They just called it a beautiful site for building, and they kept it secret. And I think it was these three elements that held the group together through all the struggles that were to come, because many began to get discouraged because they thought, we'll never get our homes. This is just impossible. None of them ever had owned their homes before, although they ranged from age 20 to age 70. And I got much of my information from a man called Leroy Cobb, who was who's the only surviving member of the original group, and he was the youngest one at the time. And he told me how hard they worked in trying to establish relationships with all these constituencies who were naturally hostile to them. The banks who wouldn't give mortgages, the city who wouldn't do the improvements, the builders who wouldn't build to code. This is something that I don't know whether that was just happening in South Bend or anywhere. It is everywhere, that builders would build to code for whites and would build below code for African Americans, 2x2 construction, no doors on closets, and all kinds of other ways of skimping. But they kept at it. They kept going, making more visits to all these people, trying to establish relationships with these hostile groups. And so I see them not just as victims of white oppression, but as really courageous actors in their own right. In fact, I like to think that they embodied the true values of America: democracy, freedom, and an engaged citizenship. And I think it's important to see it that way and not just see the victim part. And for those of you who are sociologists, they certainly lived what Du Bois called for back in 1933 when he said African America, that time he said Negroes, need to work together in intelligent cooperation, because if they don't, they would again be left on the outside as mere beggars. I'm paraphrasing this. But they certainly lived that intelligent cooperation. And in the end, they managed to build 22 homes. Just 4 families dropped out. They had become hopeless. They thought it would never work. In a white neighborhood, there were no African Americans for quite a ways around. And not only that, but they created a vibrant community there. I've talked to all the children of better homes. Most of them retired by now. And there's things like that they said. One said, we had 2 blocks of the American dream, and we lived in it. And another one said, on Elmer Street I had many dads, because everybody looked out for each other and was there for each other. And as a result, and I think this is one of the really important parts of why the story is so important today, over 50% of the children of better homes went to college, all for the first time in their families. And they went on to become teachers, principals, as a college professor, an attorney, an optometrist, and all of them, even the ones who only finished with high school, had really good jobs with AT&T or the telephone company and so on. And one of these success stories is actually here in New Haven. It is, I don't know whether anybody would still know her, she's retired by now, Brenda Holland Wright. She was the principal of Betsy Ross Arts Magnet School here in New Haven. And she's married to then the fire chief, Alan Wright. And it was Brenda who told me something that we really need to spread the word about. She said, we should be forever grateful to our parents that they made this move to Elmer Street, because it's made a difference to all our futures. And I think those words are so important today, 50 years after the Fair Housing Act was put into law, because they show the crucial importance of fair housing, not just for the present, but for future generations. And this comes at a time when the gap of home ownership between African Americans and whites is widening constantly. In fact, Forbes, just a few months ago, called it America's most pressing epidemic, because it's getting the gap gets so big, which means not just gap in home ownership, because there's the resultant gap in wealth, and because they can pass on to their children the accrued value of homes. So it's really a downward spiral that gets worse and worse as it goes along. So we need to spread the word about this. One thing that can help is education, because we're not only fighting, I think, although we are fighting a systemic racism that sometimes shows itself up in different ways, as Professor Anderson shows with his iconic ghetto, behind which sometimes even educated African Americans become invisible. Or Michelle Alexander in the Penal Code, which is legitimizing racism. That certainly is there, but something else is there too, and that's ignorance and indifference. And we need to almost shock people out of this ignorance and indifference. And maybe we can do it with stories like this, where we show what a huge impact that has on generations to come.
Thank you for that movement. Testimonial. So it's applauding.
But we are people who've actually lived some of them.
A conversation here. The issue of secrecy is one that really stands out. South Bend, as I mentioned, is the black community is close-knit across districts. It's amazing. We have family reunions in South Bend, people coming back. We have high school reunions that are all citywide, and they're all black. They're white, they're Richmonds too, but occasionally we have one that is all black, and people from all over the town come together across age lines oftentimes. And it's just amazing to just be there and see people you knew when you're growing up and what they become, and anyway. So I'd like to hear Clarence and Calvin and John reflect on some of that.
Want me to go?
Sure.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Very good afternoon, whatever it is now. First of all, let me say it's on behalf of Calvin and John and myself, we are very, very pleased to be here today to be with our friend. You don't mind if I call him Eli, do you? Well, you know him as Professor Anderson. I understand that. But we just call him Eli. And we've been calling him that all of our lives. But we are so happy to be here, and we thank him so much for inviting us, for his hospitality, and he's just really taking great care of us these few days that we've been here. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, and we'll go from there. Elijah and I, John, we started out in elementary school together, first grade. We went through elementary school. Elijah and I, John left, Linden School was the name. John left Linden a little earlier to go across what Gabrielle was just talking about, in that neighborhood with his parents. So he was one of the first families over in that neighborhood. Calvin, we met about the same time. We were all 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And my dad was the pastor of St. John Missionary Baptist Church. And at that time, St. John Missionary Baptist Church was, I would say, the most popular church in South Bend in the black community. Everybody in that community went to just about St. John Baptist Church. And the other church in the area was Pilgrim Baptist Church, where some of our black community members went. So we grew up in the church together. We grew up going to school together. We grew up in the community together. We've just been together all our lives. And Elijah, as you can tell from this professorship that he's in now, and and he just went on to do really great things. As far as the race problem went, we were, like I said, 8, 9, 10 years old when this Elmer Street project took off, and it was such a secret that my dad, who was probably 90% of the members of that organization went to his church. But even so, my dad never mentioned one word about that project.
And he knew about it.
And he knew about it. They would come to him and they would ask for prayers and they would ask for consultation on what to do. And so he knew. But he never even mentioned it, as far as I know, to my mother. He never mentioned a word about that project. So we didn't know as kids what was going on. We were just playing. But one thing we did know, I lived on Adams Street and College Street growing up. And I never even knew Elmer Street existed. We could only go so far in our neighborhood. And when we went so far, we couldn't cross that street. We couldn't cross the line. So I didn't know where Elmer Street was at that time. And when we look back on it, we say, wow, how about it? We never knew it was. I mean, we usually go there. It wasn't meant for us as kids growing up. So it was very, years later, very, very important that we got to know Elmer Street. John McCullough was, like I said, his family was the first one going over into Elmer. That's when the rest of us became familiar with Elmer Street. And when we went to Elmer Street, and all those other streets over there across Lincoln, there's a city street called Lincoln Way West. When we crossed over into Elmer Street, we were in another world. We said, wow. Those homes that they secretly built were beautiful, but they were all really white folks' homes who were beautiful. We had no idea they existed. And we said, wow, where are we? Is this South Bend, Indiana? Well, we didn't know that part of South Bend. Yeah. So,
I guess John, as a child who moved into this neighborhood on the street, what's that like? We left the segregated elementary school that we all attended, and was in this area. We went to a new school called Marquette. But tell us, if you will, what that was like.
Well, what parents were saying, we didn't know anybody was following me. It was right on in my house where I stayed, and I didn't know. So one day we decided, well, parents decided we were moving. And when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, you don't have no say-so about where you go. If they say you go, that's where you went. And to go to Elmer Street was a complete culture shock because it seemed like it was so far away from what we were used to. But on Adams Street, church was there, grocery stores were there, all your things were there. And now we take you and put you over here, whole new group of people, that you might know some of them, but most of them didn't know. And you look out your back door, another street, different people. There's no, come from all black to all white. There was 2 blocks in the middle of just like an island. And we didn't know anything about segregation. We were kids. There were times when we wanted to go play, go to the school, take one thing, and we couldn't go because parents didn't know what to expect. And one time I could go to the playground and I go back over to visit my grandparents and my aunt. And we were parents stayed, we were in the playground, that was the hangout. And one time we got there on the weekend, but we couldn't walk, it was too far to walk. And then to take the chance to walk through the neighborhood to get over there, it seemed like a long way then, but it really was a short walk.
How did the white people receive you in that new area?
Well,
in the school, in the neighborhood? What was that like? What was the reception like?
the kids, they weren't that bad as it was from the parents. When they see black kids moving into their neighborhood, they automatically think here comes trouble. And we didn't know what trouble was. So it was a challenge when I left language school to go to Marquette School. Because, I'll discuss it, we never had a black teacher. Never. All the way through elementary, middle school, or high school. There was no such thing as a black educator in the school corporation.
How many black students went to the school when you were there?
At Marquette?
Yeah, what percentage of them were?
Well,
I was the one you said.
my sister was probably the oldest at Marquette at the time. I was under her, I think the next one was Charlie Watkins. Then there were a bunch of smaller kids that, actually, I didn't know because they were smaller and didn't play. Well, my brother, he was just born, by the time he got there, path was clear. We had no problems. We tell you, he had a ball, he really did. He wasn't there when we got to school. But, it was a challenge, but once we're back, men now got through the system through athletics. It wasn't good, but we had basketball, learn how to play basketball. We didn't know, we learned how to play. At 10, 11, 12 years old, that's where I learned. We just kept going further.
And as the community grew, the community experienced white flight.
Yeah.
White flight. As the black people moved in, white people began to move out.
Yeah. And in Panorama Street, I decided. So he took me out of my element, put me over here, and I had aunt. Got me out of there. To come back over on the west side of town where I wanted to be. But there was one stipulation. I had to follow the rules. And when I didn't follow the rules, my punishment was back to Elmer Street. It was too hard to follow that. But it was an experience.
So speaking about the athletic part, both Calvin and John were basketball players, and very good basketball players, excellent basketball players. You want to say something about that, Calvin?
But
The basketball piece, or the
what I want to say now, when I came to South Bend, I moved to South Bend when I was 8 years old. And I came from Newport News, Virginia, which was completely segregated. We went to black schools, had their own high school. We had our own facilities. We had our recreation center. They had their recreation center. So it was completely segregated. And I used to know, when they said segregated, separate but equal, don't believe it. It was separate, but it was not equal. Because I had to, from my house to get to our recreation center, I had to walk by the white recreation center. Beautifully landscaped, grass, cyclone fence, just a nice setup. 2 blocks down was ours, rocks and dirt, and just completely, no comparison. So when they say separate belief, that's not true. So when I was 8 years old, we moved to South Bend, my mother and my brother and I. Now when I got to South Bend, you're talking about a shock. When my mother took me to school, first thing I saw were white people in school. And I told her, Mom, you're taking me to the wrong place. And she said, no, son, yeah, I'm going to school together here. So that was a shock to me. So I ended up going to school there, and I thought South Bend was great. I thought South Bend was a great place to stay because there were, I could go to the school I wanted to, and I loved it, I didn't know about the racial problem. Now, John, they moved out of Elmer, and every once in a while we'd go out to Elmer, and then I thought I was in heaven out there. They had these brand new, beautiful homes, and we lived in, but Clarence didn't. Clarence lived in a nice home. His father been administrating like this lived. My mother and my brother and I, we kind of moved from there. They laughed, like we laughed about it today. It wasn't so funny when I was a kid. But we laugh about it now because all the different places we moved in town. I lived, oh my goodness, within about a 3-year period, I've lived in about 15 different places. Just moving. So we had such a client. We like them to tell them about it. Okay, I don't want to stay here. So we just, even today, we laugh about those, but it wasn't funny at the time. So, so South Bend was great for me. I thought it was good. I had a lot of fun, and things went well. And I don't know if you want me to go into it, or you want to wait and go into...
Yeah, well, the athletic piece was junior high, and then there was senior high, and South Bend had some wonderful athletes among black and white people. And as a student, I ran track, and I played a little basketball, played a little football, and that kind of thing. But come time to play varsity, Calvin, John's mother's, we all tried out for the team. And I've been pretty good all the way through at that point. And I got cut. I got cut. And there was nothing like the feeling of being cut from the team. You try for the team, and the coach puts the list on the wall. Who's left?
Which I thought was terrible. I thought that was terrible. They put a list on the wall of who didn't make the team. So everybody in the school walked by and they see this list. And quite naturally they go to you. I thought that was a terrible thing to do, even at that young age. And at that point in time, I mean, I was trying out for the team. I got cut, and so that has a big effect on everything else because you see your whole future tied up with, being an athlete or what have you and all. And for me, anyway, I have found a different way. And I found an academic road, so to speak. And Calvin, and this is moving ahead somewhat, but Calvin and folks like John and our friends, we're getting scholarships to go to college, we're skipping ahead here. And I had to figure out a way to keep up with them, and I hit the books very, very hard and became almost complete nerd. To keep up with them, if you follow me. They had scholarships, athletic scholarships, but I was convinced I wasn't that good, And Calvin said I was much better than what I was. I wouldn't watch work out too. I was pretty fortunate because I came out of program, so they knew I could play, so I didn't have to go through the training. So I used to watch those guys play, and I started setting should have made him. I thought it was good. I thought it definitely should have made good, because I wanted him, he was doing great.
But getting cut is kind of arbitrary in some ways, if you follow me. Getting cut is somewhat arbitrary. But anyway, I got cut, and that turned me completely around in terms of my aspirations, if you follow me. And one thing led to another. And I wound up going on to college, ultimately. They did too. And we kept up, and I felt connected and all. But again, this is just part of the story, because of many other friends we had who went on to do great things in athletics. A lot of the people that we knew were really excellent athletes, people who could run the 100-yard dash and 10 flat like it was nobody's business, you know. Halfbacks, 185 pounds, you know, solid muscle, could run that fast. These were grown men, but they were teenagers, in a sense. And they got all kinds of scholarships and all, and Calvin was an individual as well, you know. Mike Ward is another one that you may know of. He went on to play for UCLA and became a movie star. He was playing history movies. Yeah. And all of these folks, I just mentioned some of them, but many of them had to figure out a way to make it. And athletics was one, academics was another, and you know, that's the beginning of a big story.
Could I just add something to the athletic thing? The one thing that the kids in better homes complained about, and it has to do with athletics, was the Little League. They were all great, devoted baseball players, and when the summer came and they wanted to join Little League moved its boundaries so that Elmer Street, they moved it below Huey Street so that Elmer Street wasn't included. And you say, you know, this kind of is still with you today, and that's what some of them said. That still hurts today, that happened, because they did pick up games in parks and so on, but it wasn't Little League, and they had so looked forward to doing that.
Yeah, but there's really much to do as it did at the moment.
No, but it's sort of, I mean, that was the one thing that kind of stayed with them. They still felt a sense of loss, sadness about it.
You know, one thing that stays with us to this day, and we were very young. You mentioned the natatorium in South Bend. Eventually, they opened up the natatorium, a swimming place, for all individuals, black and white. But the kicker was, for the blacks, you had 1 day a week to go to the natatorium. 1 day. And at the end of your 1 day of swimming in the natatorium, they would drain the whole pool. They would drain the whole pool, clean it out, and fill it back in for the white group to go swim. Yeah, that's what it was. That still hurts today.
And let me tell you, they almost kept me from going to the natatorium on that 1 day, because we had to go through some ice-cold water to get to the pool. I don't know if it was cleansing up. I'm not sure what that was.
That's what it was.
We had to go through ice-cold water before we got to the pool. And that almost turned me against going swimming on that 1 day. But I wanted to go so bad, I toughed it out and went through that ice cold water. So I just never knew what it was. Now, we found out it was to cleanse us before we got the pool.
But before you let you get into the pool, there was a person there who would check you and rub your skin to see if you were clean. If you get hard enough, you get skin that'll come off, you know. And the skin came off, they take you back to the shower.
Go back to the shower.
Try to discourage you from doing it.
Bleed to get the cold, I could go home anyway.
So the natatorium was one of these quite segregated places that we were living from childhood. Yeah. And at a certain point, they integrated it. You know, we had to campaign and protest, and eventually opened up the pool to everybody. It was a big victory, as it were.
It took 20 years.
Yeah, it was kind of a small thing, but yet a big thing, if you will, that symbolized so much of what, people were doing to make progress in terms of civil rights, as it were. Now, one of the things that is clear here is that the various parts of the city were black areas. There was the west side, the south side, the lake, and even parts of the east side, as it were.
Well, that was one of the first things I learned when I started research on this book. I thought I was pretty savvy about South Bend. I'd lived there over 20 years. I was always going to different places. I had never set foot in Anna Street. I didn't know what the lake was, which any African American in South Bend knows what the lake is. I mean, it was sort of one of the places where African Americans could buy homes because the lake was a toxic dumping site for industry, and the surrounding area was a wetland because it was part of the Kankakee Marsh. Once beautiful, by the way, but now really unsuitable for building. And so every African American knows where that is. And I've made the test now. Every time I meet a new white person in South Bend, I ask them about the lake. They have no idea. They think Lake Michigan. That's the only lake they can think of. They have no idea where it is. They've never been there. And if you live in such circumscribed ways, it sort of brought it home to me. How can we solve problems together, right? If we live in these kind of separate worlds. That was one of the earliest things I learned from this.
But during this time, the social movement of civil rights was going on. And then the civil rights movement was happening, which, as you all know, culminated in riots all over the country. And there's a lot of force, I should say, social force for integrating into society, not just in terms of Elm Street, but other areas too, but schools. Mm-hmm. So, Linden was segregated, but Linden fed into Central High School, junior high school, and high school, and we all attended Central High School. And within Central High School, we all had black and white friends. And we were pretty equal, quote unquote. Central was a good school, it really was. And the teachers were friendly and open and supportive in general, until you got out of your place. And now, Calvin was an excellent basketball player. He's a little modest. But he was probably one of the best that Central had to offer during that period. John too. As I say, these boys are probably the reason I went on to college. I'm going to keep up with these guys, I have to go to college, But what I want to get at is this whole idea of civility, comity, litigation, as it were, and a kind of acceptance in thought. I mean, the teachers were wonderful. The people running the cafeteria, Mrs. Koba, wonderful people. She would invite me and John to her house to play basketball with her kids. I mean, just a strange time in terms of stops and starts and contradictions, as it were, between, on the one hand, acceptance, but then rejection, you see. And Calvin, you want to say something like that?
What I was going to say is that even though I love Central and I got a chance to play there, John had the background. He had a mother and a father that was interested in education and kind of led him off. My mother didn't have, parents also, his dad was very in education, so he was good. But my mother didn't, she had about sixth grade education, and all she wanted me to do was graduate from high school. So I think they kind of took advantage of me when I was in. They wanted me to be eligible to play basketball, so they didn't give me the courses that I needed to when I graduate, to qualify for certain colleges. So these letters I'm getting from these colleges, I can't go because I'm not qualified to go because they didn't give me the proper classes. And they didn't really care about the beyond high school. They just wanted me to be eligible to play there, so I was getting courses that made no sense, you know. And at the time, I thought I was getting away. I said, man, I'm getting all these music courses and I don't have to, I'm still good. But come time with the college, sorry, you can't qualify here, you know, so. And the boy comes, but I had to go a roundabout way, you know.
And the coaches were very supportive up to a point. Yeah. And you played basketball. Clarence was a wrestler.
Excellent.
Yeah. Can I tell you a story about the racism in the high schools, or what they call it, subtle racism? That's what you call it, remember that? As a freshman, I was a pretty good wrestler. Freshman in my sophomore years in high school. Very, very good wrestler. I weighed 95 pounds. So when you had to wrestle, you wrestled in your own weight class. So I beat up everybody in my weight class because I was pretty good. And I don't mind telling you that. But here's the thing. When I was pretty good in high school wrestling, me and another fellow, a friend of ours also, his name was Ed Samilton. Ed Samilton and I, we would go into the athletic department office just about every day. We would go in there and sit and talk to the athletic director, the wrestling coach, anybody that was in sports was in there. We could go in there and we just sit down and talk to them. Hey, come here and sit down. Have a good time. Ed Samilton also was a great basketball player. So we would go in there every day. And then in our senior year, Ed Samilton turned me 200. I got injured wrestling. We could no longer participate in sports. So Ed Samilton and I, like we did every day, went up into this athletic department's office. And when we went in there, the first thing they told us, get out. Get out. We didn't want to get to them. And that hurt, again, still hurt. So bad.
Yeah. Well, see, it's almost like the schools would make use of star black athletes, but not necessarily accept them totally. And Calvin, you might have something to say about that. Because again, Calvin is such an excellent ball player, and a number of other black athletes were playing basketball, and they would make South and Central a winning team. And without these boys, they wouldn't have won as many games. And the coaches, the principal, the athletic director, these people were very much supportive of you winning games.
Oh, yeah.
But talk us about it.
Thank you, brother. I thought they was all great. You know, I was treated very nice. You know, the coaches all talked to me, the principal talked to me, athletic director. They were, you know, very, very nice to me. Until one thing happened. It changed everything. I had a friend, Mike Warren, I'll tell you who he was. He had a relationship with a white girl, which was absolutely no-no. But I didn't know it because he kept it secret. So I guess he got tired of doing it by himself, so he came to me. He told me the story, and she got a friend that really liked you, you know. I thought, oh, Mike, you know, but I said, okay. So he introduced us, so we started to, you know, mess around and then slip around and see each other. And everything was great until one day, Mike, he's writing his love letters to the parents accepted us. So they thought the girls was helping us with our schoolwork and so everything was cool. Table and everything. But Mike, he used to write these little love letters to this girl. And one day her mother found her. And so she found out that there was more things going on than just us going over there to learn, to work together. But see, Mike, talk about him and her, man. He mentioned me. so anyway, we thought the matter. So anyway, we go to school one day that we see these parents cops sitting out in the parking lot. What they doing? So we didn't say anything about it. We went on to class and we went through class and we left and that night or whatever, we didn't talk to the girl because we all of us game or something. We didn't get to talk to her. But we get to school the next morning. I walk in the class over there in the car. They said, "Calvin, please come to the office." I didn't know. I was still got lost. I walked down and there's Mike. So we sit there and the principal came out and said, "You guys just sit there, we'll see you shortly." So we sat there and talked. So we sat there an hour, 2 hours, and finally, here come Mike's mother coming in. Mike, and then class, they saw my mother coming in. They looked down the car, here come my mother. And so, oh man, let's chat about this. Anyway, they called them into the office. Then they called Mike and I into the office. We walked into the office. There said the principal, our basketball coach, the athletic director, and I played baseball and baseball coach. And there was a gentleman sitting back here. I never knew who he was or what he was there for. So we walked in and we sat down and told him about our parents. I guess you wonder why you're here. And they said, well, yeah, I'm kind of, They said, well, we've got complaints from parents that Calvin and Mike are harassing these girls. And he said, what? Oh yeah, you guys been harassing these girls, so then we started conversation back and forth, and it didn't wait to my mother first. And I guess she thought about it. She said, what? She said, my son? She said, stop right there. She said, let me tell you something. She said, my son is not chasing them, they're chasing him. They call my house constantly, they at my front door, outside blowing talk, so you got it wrong. It's just the opposite. They're chasing him, so I don't want to hear this about that. And she got up and told me, she called me Junebug. Come on, Junebug, let's get out of here. And we walked out. And I never heard anything else. They didn't say anything else to me about it. But everything changed from the way they treated me. The coaches and everybody, they couldn't get rid of me because I was, valuable for the team kind of way. But it shut me off and everything else. My scholarship that I was getting, all of a sudden I didn't see anymore. And the way I went to college, finally the coach had been trying to write me, he couldn't get me through school. He finally wrote me at home. And that's how I called him back, and so we started communicating back and forth, so I got tired that way. So once they heard that was it.
Did you have the gravity of it at the time? Did you know the gravity of it when you were young? Because, where I'm from, back then, that would have been just, a white woman at all saying anything about harassment from an African-American teenage boy had deadly consequences. Did you know the gravity of it?
No, we didn't. We didn't know. We didn't know. We just knew it wasn't true. And when my mother told them, this girl at my house all the time. I've asked her not to come, I've asked her not to call, but here she comes. So I guess from that point, they couldn't, there wasn't much they could say, because they were pursuing us.
Well, well, I mean, that, yes, most of the time that was the case too, even back into the 1890s. What happened with her outlook on that? Did she become like,
Her friends, all of her friends started abandoning them. The two girls that were hooked up with us, their friends, they kicked them out of their club that they were involved in. So yeah, they saw a big change in their friends also. Yeah, they saw a big change in their friends. So it changed the dynamics of our life dramatically.
I studied Wilmington 1898 riots, and a reporter in Wilmington had made the case, challenged the idea that of raping white women, and said that white women have this, the white women are often doing harassing, often the white women who are, pursuing the men. And it resulted in this enormous riot and massacre in Wilmington in 1898. It's like, when you tell the story, I'm like,
it didn't get quite that far, but it did affect everything else. Now, as far as Mike, he didn't get to start anymore. He moved him to the bench. Now, he was starting, but he moved him to the bench. But he couldn't take me out of that, So, anyway, he finally, somehow, Mike's dad, because Mike was a tremendous ball player, and he was going to be great, he was just a little younger. So his dad had said, well, we're going to take Mike and send him to stay with his uncle in another place. So it kind of got back to the coach that they were going to pull Mike out. So he called Mike and I to the office, and he set us down with talking to us, and he didn't say anything about, he knew Mike was going to do anything. They started talking to us about things, and we get all these calls from different people wanting to know that we had any white people to play basketball in Central. Why you playing all these black guys? And he said, I stick up for you guys. I stick up for you guys, and I do this and I do that, and they ask me all these questions. I pay you guys anyway. He's trying to make sure Mike was going to stay, It was too late for me to go anyway, because I would see. Anyway, so Mike stayed, and everything worked out well.
There was a case a little earlier involving Leroy Cobb, who was a bit older, 10, 15 years older. A white girl, also at Federal, was raped. And all they did is calling in all the black children to the principal's office, harassing one after the other. And I don't know what happened, but Leroy just remembers that suddenly all the African-American students were rounded up. They didn't look at any white kids at all.
Can I go back to something that Carol mentioned at when his mom came to school? His mom was a beautiful mom, and we all loved her. She loved us, and we all called her Mayor. Mayor. And when Carol had to go down to the principal's office, it seemed like all his friends just had a clue. I don't know how. But we had a little clue, a little inkling, something was going on. And we was kind of hanging out in the hallway with it. It was supposed to be in class. We were hanging around out in the hallway, and we saw Maria walking down the aisle. And man, when we saw Maria, she always had a smile and a greeting for us. But that day, she had a rag on her head, and she was walking down that hallway, and she wasn't smiling or talking to nobody. And we said, you really be trouble. But what got me is that they said that when they came out, when they discovered what all this commotion was about, Mace told the people in that office is this what this is about? Now here's the these heifers are the ones calling my boy, not the other way around. And that's what it was. And after she said that, she said, come on, Jim boy, let's get up and get out of here. Yeah.
That was it.
That was it. His career was almost over. That was it.
So this is the context. This is the context in which you're writing, you see. And there's this tug of war between integration, segregation, as it were. And this is part of the dynamic, you see. Tafani.
So there's a wonderful book in terms of traditional swimming by Jeff Wolf. It's called Contested Waters, the social history of swimming pools in America. And he sort of grapples with the idea of why most black people, particularly black men, don't swim, right? And it's because of this history that we don't talk about in terms of swimming pools and the lack of access to that aquariums, et cetera. That was going to be really good book. In terms of the question I want to ask, parents want to protect their children and want to shield their children from racial injury, as Dr. Anderson often talks about. And I wonder from you all, at what point did you realize that your childhood was being stolen by the sort of racial atmosphere, right, or sort of discrimination that was in the air? And then the second question related to that is, what is this community like now? What is Elm Street like now? Because I think the discrimination often sort of leads to this sort of development of ghettos, right? So can you talk about this community now? Thank you.
Well, to make it better, we have to make ourselves better. Myself personally, I went to the military, went through 4 years of service, and came back to South Bend. That was the police department. I spent 36 years on the police department. And I think I made a difference for a lot of young blacks in the community. The difference between what I went on and what is going on now, I was homegrown. And I had an understanding with a lot of these young kids' parents. They tell me, don't call me, put your foot where it belongs and send them on about the business. And I didn't do that, but like I said, I had to okay from the parents. The young officers that get on the police department now are important. They're going out to rural areas, bringing them in, they don't know the community, they don't know the culture. And that is the main problem we have nationwide. And you can go, live in New Haven and go to New York City and get a job on the police department, you don't know nothing about New York City. But if you grew up there, you would know the demographics, you know the culture, you know a lot of the people. But like I said, to change things, we have to change things for them. Because like I said, you wait on society is just trying to fill a spot. We need to hire somebody that don't really know. In fact, I can say it now, that they just fired a police officer in South Bend for wearing a red light and killing a young mother of 2 kids at 4 o'clock in the morning. He's running 90 miles an hour with a red light on. Going nowhere. So the Board of Safety, the chief, mayor recommended they fire him, they fired him. Which he should have been. Because they never changed the rule. When you run a single turn with red light and siren, when you approach an intersection, you're supposed to slow down before you go through it. You got to clear the intersection before you go through it. And 90 miles an hour, you feel it, and they showed the video, and it was like this. Yeah, I didn't have a chance. And the other police officers getting shot, do they deserve it? I would hope not, but one in Chicago, you just found him guilty of killing that kid how come you not finding really shooting 16 times over there? Well, that's wrong. But like I said, Cal, he taught school. Once he was a hopeful from the play. I mean, there's different phases in the community that where you have to reach out and touch people and you understand. You always meet somebody and, you know, a kind word goes a long way. So, I hope I answered part of your question.
Yeah.
But,
the community today, Elmer Street, which runs parallel to Olive Street. And again, I used to go to John's house for parties, and his mother used to have the most wonderful parties for him, you know, and he had... Mighty fun. Good. I mean, beautiful place. And his mother was so nice. And, I mean, that whole scene was just such a lovely area. But what does it look like today?
Yeah, I can.
But it's white flight. And that's a very important consideration.
Yeah.
Because when black people move in, and the tipping point gets to a certain, you know, people move out. But also, the city services begin to decline. And this is what happened there. So this idea of the iconic ghetto, you know, and John was a police officer. And a lot of shootings in that area, drugs in that area today. It's really changed up. That cemetery there, you know, and it's just changed. It's like the street, you know, kind of thing. The whites moved away, and then, you know, the money went away. I'll let
Yeah, two things. The 2 blocks on Anna Street are still better off than much of the neighborhood because much of it is still owned by the children of better homes and they're taking good care of their property. But the neighborhood got neglected as the whites moved out. There was neighborhood neglect. When the city comes in, we need to revitalize. And revitalization in that case meant 1,000 houses in 1,000 days. They knocked down 1,000 houses in 1,000 days. They knocked down Leroy Cobb's former house. He had lived there for 40 years. Then he sold it to someone. And when that person tried to sell and couldn't find a buyer, he just left it. And people kept calling code and saying, we need to do something, help us keep that up. But nobody did. It was beyond repair. It had to be knocked down. And it's then an empty lot, and which doesn't help either. So that is, the cities need to, community development needs an organized community to control that development. Otherwise, things happen that are only detrimental, and at best, it's, not best, worst probably, it's gentrification, which makes all the African Americans move to another high poverty area. And that's what happens. So community development is huge. And again, organization, the way Better Homes had organization, is huge to try to affect a community development without displacement.
Right. But then what happens to housing values is another piece, you see. And the black people, you would say, operate in a restricted housing market, whereas white people operate in a more expansive market.
Because they haven't had the advantage of all this home equity for generations.
Thank you very much for this fascinating account. I'm overwhelmed really listening to your pieces of the life story and the life story of the community. But I'm curious if you could comment on what was the attitude of people left behind. So not the reception in the new place, but the relationships with the place that your families left. right immediately after that happened, and then over time. So, what was it like? Would you be welcome to go back? Would you like to go back? How did you find it if you went back? And who was left back there?
I can tell you my friends in my neighborhood kind of adopted me and brought off to college. We were all so glad that I was brought off to college, even the guys that were the troublemakers. So it protected me because they wanted me to go off and do better. But the ones that didn't go were glad to see me get out of there and go to school and come back. And they used to admire, so they gave us a lot of respect for giving us to do us back. So they accepted us real well.
As far as the elder street, it's still there. My folks' home is still there, it's still in good shape. Most of the homes out there are in decent shape, pretty well taken care of. And my brother is the overseer of the property, the father is in the nursing home. But would I move back there now? Yeah.
I think you mentioned what would it be like there if you had to move back or go back to see where you came from a little bit?
Right, but also came from before, the better homes of South Bend constructed, to the original.
Do you mean south, from the south?
Well, yeah, so what I meant is that in the city there was this new community that was being built, and the families with young children moved there. And so for children, they came to a new place, which was somewhat exciting, somewhat new, somewhat maybe, they didn't want to be there because it wasn't familiar, so they didn't have their former playground. But what if, these people have to go back to where they were born? What would it be like? Could they even do that?
I think in our community, in the black community in South Bend, it wouldn't matter where some of our kids' neighbors moved to. It wouldn't, if they moved out to Elmer Street, for example, from a place we used to call Chapin Street. If they moved from Chapin Street to Elmer Street, and they wanted to maybe just come back to Chapin Street, they would be welcomed with open arms because we were so close. It didn't matter where we moved to. You could always come back to that community, that neighborhood, because it was our neighborhood. We were together always. So it didn't matter where you went, where you moved to, you could always come back home.
And they were glad to see you.
And there's always glad to see you. Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of adopted it. We should not clear the college. They felt that they did that. They felt that they should be in college. So when I came back, I was nothing open.
But the point I was making is that there are parts of the community that are kind of well off. The parts that are not so well off. So it's kind of dotted in a way. As I think about the drug trade on Olive Street, which is right above Elmer, and the shootings that occur almost incessantly, in that area. And this is not far from Elmer Street, So it's a mixed situation in that way. But the one thing that's important, I think, is that the community experiences this white flight. The blacks move in, the whites move out. And the property values go down. So if you move in as a black person to the black community and hope for investment, it's a bad investment because the property values will go down. And when you sell, you can only sell to black people who presumably may have a limit as opposed to the open housing market, you see. And so that's one of the pieces that you see all over the country, this fair play, as it were.
Yeah,
That's implications for the way the community gets taken care of, the way the local government looks at it, that kind of thing.
I don't know whether that happened in other areas, but when Studebaker, the main company in South Bend, closed in 1963, 23% of the population left South Bend, and ironically, deliberately, at that very time, the city boundaries were expanded, which allowed for white flight even more. So the whites could leave the inner city completely and then blame the blighted condition on the African Americans who had to stay there. So that was really made it even worse, made the whole situation even worse.
So I would suggest that this idea of the ghetto, that kind of ghetto, becomes exacerbated by these developments. I mean, the image of the ghetto becomes very, very powerful. And so a lot of people begin to buy into it, including blacks themselves, and they want to get away from it, if you will. So this is it's a crazy dynamic, but the big thing is that as blacks move in, the whites move out, and the Catholic goes away, and so then there's the treatment of the community.
And clearly it reinforces prejudice, but it also reinforces indifference and ignorance, because they live in their leafy suburbs and they don't want to know or pay any attention to what's going on there. So it reinforces the two things that really make matters worse.
But this is not peculiar South Bend. This is happening all over the country.
Sure.
At some level. Yeah.
As you mentioned that your dad worked in the foundry?
Yes.
Did he ever, I'm interested in like overlapping organizations with the Better Homes, like unions. Did you ever talk about the union?
Oh, yeah.
What was the situation going on with the union at that time?
He belonged to the UAW, AFL-CIO. And, I was born on a plantation in the South, and my folks moved to South Bend when I was 2. Moved to South Bend, we moved into my uncle's house, which is a big, big house on the west side of South Bend. And we lived in, my mother and my dad and I had other brothers and sisters, but they took me with them to South Bend, the big migration piece. And when they wanted to get an apartment, they couldn't have kids in the apartment, so they left us with a couple that kind of took care of us until they came back. And anyway, he got this job at Studebakers, and he worked there. And my mother was working as a domestic, and she then developed a grocery store. And so they became pretty well off until they were able to buy a home in an area that was off limits to black people, And in that area, basically, went through the white flight process and all this. Now, my dad, when he worked at Studebakers, he had white co-workers. He worked in a foundry where a lot of black people worked, as Gabriel said, and it was tough work. I thought it was good for him. The unions in that day were very liberal institutions. I mean, they really brought blacks in because blacks had formerly been used as strike breakers and what have you. So they brought black people in to deal with that. It was just instrumental in many ways. He never expressed that, but I think that's what was going on. But the union was a good thing, because my dad in 1952 made like about $5,400 a year, which was good money. The school teachers, my fourth grade school teacher was making $47,000 a year. So a working person with no education and no skills could as an educated person. And this is true for a lot of those people that you're talking about.
Exactly.
They were well off. And the unions were a big part of that.
Yes.
The unions, I mean, we were not poor in the sense of being like desperate or anything like that. We had resources. There was unemployment from time to time because of various ups and downs of industry. But we were pretty well off in that way, But again, by the time we moved into this new house, which was maybe 3 or 4 black people living there when we moved in. By the time I graduated from high school, it was all black. All black. So this white flight is serious, if you will.
So there was a real sort of, would you say your dad felt camaraderie with his white colleagues?
I wouldn't say
They were
that.
all in union together.
I wouldn't say that. He worked with white fellows and black fellows. We never had anyone over to the house, and we went over to their homes. It was very segregated in that way. Much like the society is segregated today. I mean, we're still very segregated socially, if you will, and it was, and that hasn't changed much, in my opinion, in South Bend.
So workplace integration might not have bothered them, but the residential integration might have bothered even the very same people that your dad worked with who were white.
Well, the idea is that to be able to buy a house is a basic economic decision, because you're buying the right house, you invest in that house, and that improves in terms of value and that kind of thing. But for black people, the value doesn't always increase, you see. And that's the point that you're making. And this is, when we talk about structural poverty, this is one of the pieces that exacerbates that problem. Because black people, because of the racism and the stigma associated with black skin, when they move in, poverty values drop, if you will. And it's complicated, but this is part of the issue that we're grappling with as a nation right now today. Yeah. But no, the unions were good. I mean, for black people, I think, in general, they were quite liberal and really pushed a lot of the social progress that we see today. I mean, and of course there are always problems and that kind of thing, but in general it was a relatively progressive institution, the unions, and I think my dad would agree with that,
Well, an example was that the AFL-CIO in 1941, when J. Chester Allen, the attorney, and he was state representative then, he had a bill authored a bill in the lower house that industries who take defense contracts should be legally forced to hire African Americans if they are skilled for the job, because they haven't done that up to then. The bill was defeated, but the CIO was behind it. They were supporting it. And also it meant that everybody got the same salary. So Leroy Cobb, straight out of high school, got a fantastic salary because it was a unionized plant. So it was, I don't know what the power of the unions is right now. I think that's one of the problems too. I think it has decreased so substantially that the unions do not have the clout they used to have and the support they used to have.
Yeah. So unions have been very good for black people in general, although initially they were resistant historically.
It sounds like, though, it might have been the union that kind of put the very basic elements in place that allowed better homes in South Bend to be created.
That's true, because they had enough income to be able to afford the down payment and the necessary steps. And, African Americans have been literally cheated out of millions upon millions of dollars. Because they couldn't buy houses on their own, there came these helpful people who said, "Oh, I'll sell you a house, just sign this contract." And they would sign the contract with lots of small print, and they would make improvements, they would make fairly steep monthly payments. And if they missed just one payment, the guy would come up and show them the thing and said, "You never owned this house. All the improvements, all the money you've put in, it's gone." And then within the next day, he would sell it to some other unsuspecting person. And the people were left without anything.
Time for maybe one more question, comment.
I grew up in the U.S. away from my grandparents and all that, so I just think it's a blessing to see you guys in your camaraderie. It's a privilege to witness.
So thank you. Wonderful.
I have a question.
One more.
Also, many thanks for sharing your experiences.
use of your blessing is wonderful too. I wonder if you could travel back a bit in your memories to your childhood years when you started out for Lincoln School. You said it was a big no-no for love relationships. What about friendship? When friendship bonds made, or was it segregated, or?
Oh yeah, friendship bonds were, we all had white, black friends. I mean, it was just a very progressive moment. I think the point that you make is very telling because at a different time, Calvin and Mike would have been lynched, if you will. You know?
Where I'm from, yes.
Yeah, and well, even I mean the South and even South Bend. I mean, but what I'm saying is that we as people kind of like knew that this was a new day as young people. You see, and if Calvin could tell the whole story about him and Mike, he would tell you about the smiles and the laughter that he and Mike were going through. They thought this was kind of a joke. I mean, Mike was kicking Calvin under the table, you know, and listen, watch this, you know. And at one point, the principal would yell to Mike. Now, Mike was just a wonderful young man and good character, all that stuff. And the principal, I mean, was somebody we all looked up to, and the coach too. We looked up to. And the athletic director, he just was like, wonderful people. And at one point, he said, Buster.
We were sitting there, and Mike was good, man. You know, just everything put said, no. He did, no. So the principal, boom, came down there, said, okay, Buster, you better start telling the truth. Everybody, my mother, you know.
This is because of the idea that there was this acceptance of a certain sort. It was a moment of history. I mean, we had equal relations with white kids. We thought we were just as good as any white person.
Before I mentioned Alexander Manley, we were out for his head, and he fled to Ohio. So that was in 1898. There was already, even in the 1890s, an understanding that he was safer in the Indiana, Ohio, Illinois area.
Yeah.
And they burned down his newspaper, and they went on a rampage in his town.
Sure. And it's hard to really say how much danger Mike and Calvin were in. I mean, because that goes in ways you just don't know. What I'm suggesting was that we as kids thought we were equal. We thought we had, I mean, white young boys and girls, we were just friends. I mean, we'd go to parties together, United Methodist Church, they had parties down there, and we'd all hang out together. Innovative. That was the idea, and King was like pushing this. And we thought there was a new day, and Alpha Stosky and all kinds of.
But even though, I said something about stolen, even though we were friends with white boys and girls, Calvin introduced me to a white girl that we became friends. Even though we were friends and we could go different places, when I would take this young lady home, this white girl home, I had to turn off all of my lights and cover the dome of the inside of the dome of the car to open the door so she could get out. We were friends, but you could only go so far. So if her parents would have seen me letting her out of that car in that neighborhood at that time of the night, I don't know what would have happened. Yeah.
Do I have time to tell them?
Sure, I wouldn't.
Okay. One thing happened. This young lady stopped by my house one day, and she was working for the hospital. She was a chemist at the hospital. And so I was going to drop her off at work. On the way, I ran out of gas. So she got out of the car, and she was going to walk down to the Lincoln Way to catch the bus. And I forgot that I told her to tell her something. So I ran down the street after the car and stopped her, and somebody called the police and said this black guy is chasing the white girl down the street, you know, and so the police came, you know, and wanted to know what was going on. I told them, I said no. So luckily, she was an honest girl. So the police went to her and said, was this guy chasing you? And she said, heavens no. You know, he wasn't chasing me. But the bad thing about it, once they took me out, they dropped me all the thing. I had to walk all the way home. I had to walk home by myself because they took me out there, but they didn't take me home. You know, so.
But speaking of Anna's question, dealing with friendships and all, and across racial lines, not just sexual relationships, but friendships between and among people. The problem is that those friendships meant that black people were getting out of their place, quote unquote. There are all these contradictions in the limits of status, you see, because just as you said, I mean, you know, and we see this a lot today, but it was going on then too, but we were lulled into thinking that we were equal. And this is why you guys could laugh at what they were saying. I mean, you know, laugh at the coach, laugh because they didn't look at the difference. I mean, his mother came in and just thought, it's about this? You know. So it was a time, it was a strange time, and that time in some ways has persisted because there's all these equivalent relationships between blacks and whites even today. But that wasn't the situation for our parents, you see. It wasn't, you know, so that's no different, but very important. This could go on and on, and I could go on and on, but thank you very much. This is just wonderful. Thank you.
Did you enjoy it? It was fun, wasn't it? You didn't even have a cigar. What are we doing with this other sandwich? What are we doing with the rest of the sandwich? Make this a little smaller.
Well, that's true of the American racial relations right there. You know?